The hiss of the grill was a constant prayer in the church of the lunch rush. Grease and coffee formed a holy incense that clung to Imani's uniform, her hair, her skin. She moved through the narrow aisles of the diner like a dancer who knew every crack in the floor, her feet sure, her hands full. A plate of fries for table 6, a coffee refill for the man in the corner booth, a placating smile for the impatient woman by the door. This was her world, a clatter of ceramic, the drone of conversations, the rhythmic, chaotic pulse of people needing to be fed. Imani was good at her job. She navigated the chaos with a calm that bordered on serene, a small island of order in a sea of spilled ketchup and ringing bells. At 22, she wore competence like a second skin, a necessary armor in a life that offered no safety nets. Tucked beneath the collar of her worn, pink-striped uniform was the only soft thing she owned, a small, golden locket, its surface smoothed by the touch of 3 generations. It was a quiet weight against her collarbone, a constant, silent conversation with the man who had placed it there, her father. Then he walked in. The diner's bell announced his arrival, but it was the silence that followed him that was the real herald. Conversations faltered. The cook at the grill looked up, his spatula hovering over a sizzling burger patty. The man in the corner booth lowered his newspaper. It was as if the room collectively held its breath, recognizing a predator had just entered the fold. He was not large or loud. He was the opposite. He was a study in stillness, a figure carved from shadow and steel. His suit was a deep charcoal, tailored with such precision it seemed to move with a life of its own. It was the kind of suit that cost more than Imani's car, more than her last year of rent. A watch with a face as dark as a winter night peeked from one cuff. But it was his eyes that held the room hostage. They were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth as they swept over the space, cataloging, assessing, dismissing. 2 other men, dressed in similar, though less expensive, armor, flanked him. They moved with an unnerving economy, their gazes sweeping the diner for threats. They guided him to the empty booth in Imani's section, the one with the torn vinyl that everyone usually avoided. He slid onto the bench without a word, his posture immaculate. Imani picked up a menu and a glass of water, her heart a steady, professional beat. She had served cops, politicians' aides, and local celebrities. A man in a nice suit was just another customer. She approached the table, her focus on the worn linoleum. "Welcome to the daily grind. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Her voice was even practiced. He did not look at the menu. He was looking at her. No, not at her. At her throat. His eyes were fixed on the glint of gold just visible beneath her collar. For the briefest of moments, the glacial calm of his face fractured. It was a flicker of something raw, something ancient and painful. There and gone so fast she might have imagined it. "I will have black coffee," he said. His voice was a low rumble, English perfect but edged with the sharp, clean consonants of soul. Imani nodded, turning to leave. "The locket," he said, stopping her. She turned back slowly. The air around the table felt different, colder. His 2 guards were watching her now, their casual stances gone. "Excuse me?" "Your locket," he repeated, his gaze unwavering. "How much do you want for it?" Imani's hand went instinctively to her chest, her fingers closing over the warm metal. A laugh almost escaped her, a nervous, bewildered sound. "I'm sorry, sir. It's not for sale." "Everything is for sale," he stated, not as a point of debate, but as a fundamental law of the universe, like gravity. "I will give you $10,000 for it. Cash." The number hung in the air, obscene and absurd. $10,000. It was more money than she had ever seen in one place. It was a new transmission for her dying car. It was an escape from the mountain of bills on her kitchen table. The word no was already on her lips, but it caught in her throat. She could feel the eyes of the entire diner on her. "Thank you for the offer," she said, her voice tighter than before. "But no, it was my father's." She expected him to dismiss her, to be annoyed. Instead, a strange, predatory curiosity entered his eyes. He leaned forward slightly, the scent of expensive cologne, cedar, and something like cold smoke, drifting across the table. 100,000. A gasp came from a nearby table. Imani's breath hitched. This was insane. It was a game, a power play by a rich man used to getting what he wanted. Her refusal was not a barrier to him. It was an invitation to apply more force. "Sir," she began, her own calm starting to fray. "It's not about the money. Everything," he said again, his voice dropping lower, more intense, "is about the money. 500,000 inch." Her legs felt weak. The clatter of the diner had faded into a distant hum. It was just her and him, locked in a battle of wills over a small piece of gold. Her locket was not just a memory. It was the only piece of her father she had left. It was her history, her anchor. To sell, it would be like selling a piece of her own soul. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it was solid. It was granite. He stared at her, and for the first time, he seemed to see her, truly see the woman standing before him, and not just the object he desired. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the unwavering clarity in her dark eyes. He saw a will that matched his own. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was not a pleasant sight. $1 million, he said, his voice a silken threat. "That is my final offer. Think about it." He slid a black credit card across the table. It was made of metal, stark and severe. There was no name on it, only a string of numbers and a single, embossed character she didn't recognize. He stood, his movements fluid and precise. His guards fell into place beside him. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the diner, the bell chiming his departure. He left behind a room of stunned silence, a black card on a sticky tabletop, and $1 million question hanging in the air. Imani stared at the card, her heart hammering against her ribs. She hadn't just refused a customer. She had said no to a king, and she had the terrifying feeling that in his world, kings did not take no for an answer. The next 2 days were a blur of nervous energy. Imani went to work, smiled at customers, and refilled coffee pots, but a part of her was always listening, waiting. The black card was tucked away in her wallet, a cold, heavy secret. She told herself to throw it away, to forget the impossible offer and the man with eyes like chips of obsidian. But she couldn't. The encounter had unsettled her world, like a stone dropped into a still pond, the ripples spreading wider and wider. The attack came on a Tuesday night after her late shift. The alley behind the diner was her usual shortcut, a familiar path lit by the jaundiced glow of a single street lamp. She was halfway down the narrow passage when 2 men stepped out from behind a dumpster, blocking her way. They were nothing like the man from the diner. They were cheap thugs, their menace loud and artless. "Evening, sweetheart," one of them sneered, revealing a row of yellowed teeth. "We heard you came into some money." Or, at least, the other one added, his eyes fixing on her chest. The key to it. Imani's blood ran cold. She backed away slowly, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," the first one said, taking a step forward. "Just give us the necklace, and we'll let you go." She clutched the locket through her thin jacket. Panic, sharp and metallic, rose in her throat. She wasn't giving it to them. She would fight. She swung her bag, heavy with her work shoes and a textbook, catching the first man in the side of the head. He grunted, stumbling back. It was a small victory. The second man lunged, grabbing her arm. Then, the alley filled with shadows. It happened so fast, it was surreal. 2 figures descended on her attackers with a brutal, silent efficiency. There were no wasted movements, no grunts of effort. Just the sickening, wet thud of fist meeting flesh, a choked cry, and then silence. Her 2 assailants were on the ground, unconscious or worse. Standing over them were the 2 men from the diner, the guards. One of them turned to her. His face was impassive. "Mr. Kwan sent us. He was concerned for your safety." Before Imani could process what was happening, a black sedan pulled up to the mouth of the alley, its engine a low, expensive purr. The guard opened the back door.
Please.
He is waiting for you. It wasn't a request. She was bundled into the car, the door closing with a heavy, final thud. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows as they drove, ascending into the wealthier heights of the hills overlooking the city. She was a prisoner, taken for her protection. They arrived at a skyscraper that pierced the night sky, a monument of glass and steel. The private elevator whisked them to the penthouse in unnerving silence. When the doors opened, they revealed a space so vast and minimalist it felt more like an art gallery than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a panoramic view of the glittering city below. And there, standing in the center of it all, was Kwon Ji-han. He was dressed in a simple black silk shirt and dark trousers. Without the armor of his suit, he seemed both more human and more dangerous. He turned as she entered, his eyes immediately finding the locket at her throat. "It seems my interest in you has created complications," he said, his voice calm. "You're no longer safe. You will stay here until the matter is resolved. Stay here." Imani found her voice, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. "You can't just kidnap me." "I am not kidnapping you," he corrected, stepping closer. "I am protecting my investment. Your presence in the world has become a liability. To me." He brought her to his fortress, this gilded cage, and for days, she existed in a state of suspended reality. She had a luxurious suite of rooms, clothes she was afraid to touch, and food prepared by a silent chef. But the doors were always guarded. She was his possession, a problem he was managing. One evening, she was standing by the vast window, watching the endless river of headlights below, her hand on her locket. It was her only connection to the world she had lost. She heard him approach. He stood beside her, not speaking for a long time, just following her gaze. "Why is it so important to you?" he finally asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He nodded toward the locket. "It was my father's," she said simply. "He gave it to me before he died." Ji-han was silent for a moment. "It is identical to one I lost many years ago," he said, his eyes distant, fixed on a memory she couldn't see. "I gave it to a woman. Her name was Miso." He spoke of her with a strange reverence, the cold mask of the Mafia boss slipping away to reveal a deep, unhealed wound. Minasio was his first love, the only person, he said, who had ever seen the man and not the monster. She was killed in an ambush by a rival family, a casualty of a war that was his and not hers. He had been there. He had held her as she died, and in the chaos, the locket was torn from her neck, lost. "I failed her," he said, the words stark and empty. "I could build an empire, command an army of men, but I could not protect the one person who mattered." He looked at Imani, his gaze intense. "When I saw that locket on you, I thought fate was giving me a chance to reclaim a piece of what I had lost." Imani stared at him, seeing for the first time the ghost that haunted him. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man hollowed out by grief.
She didn't know what to say.
The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the weight of his dead love and her dead father. The danger he'd spoken of was not an exaggeration. The rival faction, the Choi family, saw his obsession with Imani and her locket as a weakness to be exploited. A few nights later, the penthouse alarms blared. The sound was shrill, violent. Ji-han's men moved with practiced urgency. "Stay in my office. Lock the door," Ji-han commanded her, his eyes already cold and tactical. He pressed a heavy pistol into her hand, his fingers briefly closing over hers. "Do not open it for anyone but me." She ran to the office as the sounds of a fight erupted in the main living area. She locked the heavy oak door and stood with her back against it, the gun heavy and foreign in her trembling hands. Through the wood, she could hear shouts, the sickening crack of breaking bones. This was his world. This was the price of his empire. In a moment of chaos, she noticed a secondary door in the office, one she hadn't seen before. A service exit. It was a chance. She could run, disappear into the city while he was distracted. She could go back to her life of slinging hash and counting tips. It would be hard, but it would be her own. She took a step toward the exit, her hand on the knob. But she hesitated. She thought of Jihan out there, fighting. She thought of the look in his eyes when he spoke of Minasio, the profound vulnerability beneath the layers of ice. He was a killer, a crime boss, a monster. But he was also the man who was keeping her safe, in his own twisted way. Leaving felt like a betrayal. Instead of running, she dragged a heavy desk in front of the main office door, barricading it. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might buy him time. It was a choice. A small one, but it was hers. She was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She was a participant. The fighting subsided. After an eternity of silence, she heard a soft knock on the door.
Imani.
It's me. She pulled the desk away and unlocked the door. Jihan stood there, breathing heavily. There was a cut on his cheek, but his eyes were clear, burning with adrenaline. He swept his gaze over the room, saw the barricade, then looked back at her. He stepped inside, crowding her against the wall. His body was a wall of heat. He reached up, his hand hovering near her face, as if to check for injury. But he didn't touch her. Their eyes locked. The space between them crackled with unspoken energy, thick with the scent of gunpowder and his cologne. You could have run, he said, his voice a low rasp. I know, she whispered. He stared at her, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. Thank you. It sounded like the words were torn from him, a concession he had never made before. He had expected her to be a liability. He had not expected her to be an ally. That was the moment everything changed. In the aftermath of the attack, Jihan became consumed with knowing everything about her. He had his people dig into her past, searching for any connection, any explanation for the Locket's existence. Meanwhile, Imani was drawn deeper into his world. She was no longer confined to her suite. She was a quiet shadow in his life, watching him conduct his business from the periphery of his office. She saw the brutality of it. One afternoon, she witnessed him pass judgment on a lieutenant who had sold information to the Choi family. Jihan's justice was swift, surgical, and utterly without mercy. He didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke a few quiet words, and the man was led away, his face ashen with terror. Imani felt a wave of nausea. This was the reality of the man who was protecting her. It should have sent her running for the forgotten service exit. But she stayed. She saw the grim weight on his shoulders, the isolation of a man who could trust no one. She was beginning to understand the cold, terrible logic of survival that governed his kingdom. The Choi family, enraged by their failed assault, grew bolder. They ambushed Jihan's car one afternoon as he and Imani were being driven across town. The world erupted in a storm of shattering glass and the percussive roar of automatic gunfire. Before Imani could even scream, Jihan moved. He threw his body over hers, shielding her as bullets hammered against the armored plating of the sedan. The weight of him was absolute, his scent filling her senses. For a terrifying second, as a bullet starred the glass just inches from his head, she thought he was hit. A visceral, shocking fear seized her, the fear of losing him. It was a feeling so powerful, so unwanted. She felt dizzy. The driver, a former Special Forces soldier, navigated them out of the kill zone with terrifying skill. Back in the sterile safety of the penthouse, the adrenaline left Imani shaking. Jihan's men had captured one of the shooters. They dragged him into the cavernous living room. He was young, defiant, spitting insults. Jihan's face was a mask of cold fury. He picked up a heavy glass paperweight from his desk, his intent unmistakable. But Imani stepped forward. During the ambush, she had overheard the shooter screaming into a phone, something about his brother. Wait, she said, her voice clear and steady. Jihan paused, looking at her. She walked up to the terrified young man. Your brother, Sangmin, she said, inventing the name, a gamble. He's safe. We have him. He'll stay that way, as long as you tell us everything you know about the Choi's next move. It was a lie, a cold, calculated piece of cruelty she hadn't known she possessed. The young man's bravado crumbled. Tears streamed down his face as he choked out the details of the Choi's plan. Imani watched him, a cold pit in her stomach. She had crossed a line. She had used a man's love for his family against him. She had used the enemy's own tactics. Later that night, Jihan found her on the balcony, staring at the indifferent city. "I did not expect that from you," he said, his voice quiet behind her. That was a darkness I had not seen. She didn't turn. "I'm a fast learner," she replied, her voice brittle. "I'm learning the language of this place. You're my teacher." He came to stand beside her, so close she could feel the warmth of his body in the cool night air. "You are the only thing in this empire that feels real," he confessed, the words low and dangerous. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was an admission of a fatal weakness, an acknowledgement that she had breached his walls. The information from the captured soldier was followed by a report from Jihan's own investigators. The truth of the locket was finally revealed, and it was stranger than either of them could have imagined. Imani's father had been an American soldier stationed in Korea decades ago. He had been in the city on the night Min Seo was killed. A kind, gentle man reeling from the recent death of his own wife, he had found the locket on the blood-stained pavement in the chaotic aftermath of the gang violence. He saw it not as spoils, but as a sign, a beautiful, tragic thing in a world that had become ugly. He kept it, and years later, he gave it to his only daughter, Imani. The Choi family, through their own network, had discovered the same truth. The locket was not Min Seo's, but it was a symbol of Jihan's greatest failure. Their plan was now clear: to capture Imani, take the locket, and destroy Jihan by forcing him to watch his history repeat itself. The final confrontation was set for a neutral location, a vast, abandoned shipyard by the river. The choice proposed a trade, Imani for a lucrative shipping route. Jihan knew it was a trap. There would be no trade. "You will stay here," he told her. "It's too dangerous." "No," Imani said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You made me a part of this world, Jihan. You don't get to bench me for the final act. I'm not your ghost. I won't be a victim waiting to happen." He saw the steel in her eyes, the same unbreakable will he'd seen in the diner. He gave a single, sharp nod. The shipyard was a graveyard of rusting steel, smelling of salt and decay. The meeting took place in the cavernous belly of a half-finished container ship. The air was thick with tension. Choi, a snake in a tailored suit, stood with his men, a smug smile on his face. The moment the false negotiations broke down, the space erupted into controlled violence. Jihan's men were disciplined, but the choice had the advantage of terrain. The fight was a blur of motion and sound. Jihan moved through it all like a deadly choreographer. But the plan went wrong. Jihan was pinned down behind a stack of crates. Choi's son, a vicious young man, grabbed Imani, pressing a knife to her throat. He held up the locket, which had come loose in the struggle. "Look, Kwan," he shouted, his voice echoing in the metal hull. "History repeats itself. Another woman you can't protect." Jihan's face was murderously blank, but Imani saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. It was the wound Choi wanted to exploit. And in that moment Imani acted. She wasn't a soldier, but she was a survivor. And she had been watching. She had been learning. She ignored the knife at her throat and looked past her captor, directly at Choi's second-in-command, a man named Park. "Mr. Park," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "Jihan knows about the money you've been skimming from the Yokohama accounts. He knows you've been planning to make a move on Choi yourself." It was another gamble, a lie built on whispers she had pieced together in Jihan's office. But it landed. A flicker of panic crossed Park's face. Choi's son turned his head for a fraction of a second to follow Park's gaze. It was the only opening she needed. She stomped her heel down hard on his instep and drove her elbow back into his ribs. He grunted, his grip loosening. She wrenched herself free, grabbing his wrist and twisting, a move she'd seen one of Jihan's guards practice for hours. The knife clattered to the floor. The momentary distraction was all Jihan needed. The tide of the battle turned instantly and decisively. When it was over, the silence that fell was heavy, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Jihan's men were securing the area, their movements efficient and grim. Jihan ignored all of it. He walked straight to Imani, his eyes locked on her. He bent down and picked up the locket from the grimy floor.
He didn't pocket it. He didn't even look at it.
He stepped behind her and carefully fastened the chain back around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, sending a jolt through her. "This was never hers," he said, his voice low, "for her alone. It has always been yours." He was letting Minicio go. He was choosing the woman standing right in front of him. The cost of the victory was etched on the faces of his men. His most trusted lieutenant had taken a bullet meant for him, and though he would live, the price was paid in blood. Nothing in this world was free. Back in the penthouse, the city lights below seemed distant, like a galaxy of borrowed light, indifferent and sprawling. It was a world of strangers, a world she used to belong to. Now, her world had shrunk to the space of this room, to the silence between her and the man standing beside her at the window. He didn't promise her a future, or safety, or an easy life. He couldn't. Instead, he simply stood there, his presence a solid, grounding weight. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat of him, a silent claim. She reached up, her fingers closing over the locket. It was no longer just a memory of her father. It was a testament to her own survival, a symbol of a choice made in an alley, in an office, in the belly of a rusting ship. She did not find peace. She had found something far more terrifying and far more honest. She had found her place. She closed her eyes, the cool metal a familiar weight against her skin, and for the first time since he had walked into her diner, she felt the steady, certain beat of her own heart. She was home.